Hello. In today's Turnaround series, we're going to be talking to Prakhar Goyal, who is actually the head of technology and engineering at Magic Bricks. Today, we have got Prakhar Goyal, who is actually the head of engineering and in charge of innovation for Magic Bricks, which is a Times Group company. So he has had an illustrious career, having worked in multiple companies. So today we will, in the expert series, we will actually have him share his thoughts on what could be the tips and techniques to turn businesses and IT organizations around. So yes, Prahar, so just give us a little intro about yourself. How is your journey been? I see it's quite colorful. You've actually started off with DirectT, and which actually was a very successful, one of the biggest success in India. And then you went on to SAP and other things. So I think you could just start off with your journey and then take it from there.
Yeah, sure. So thanks, for introducing me. So yeah, I mean, I think that's a valid question which you first put, right? That what are the tips to, get successful in this industry? But before that, let me introduce, based on my career journey. So I graduated from IIT Bombay doing my computer science, BTech and MTech both. And I graduated in 2009. And after that, it has been around 11 years in the industry. So in this 11 years, I worked at some of the research institutions abroad, and most of my career journey has been into startups. Why I'm focusing on it, because I think as we go through this chat or discussion, I think you will realize that there's a big difference between the work culture and the aspirations of established organizations versus startups. Right. So of course that definitely will cover in this talk, but my experience was mostly into DirectI, eGain Communications, Guavos Network Systems. So I would not term Magic Bricks also as one of the startups, but yes, we have really very agile work environment, and we consider ourselves as a startup, because although we come under the umbrella of like a very big group which is like Times of India group, but still I think from work perspective, it's a very, very fast environment, right? I mean, you have to deliver fast, you have to fail fast, you have to be very, very agile in your work. So I think from work perspective, I have worked at Amazon also. I worked at SAP Labs. So all these are big, multinational companies where, the work environment is slightly different. Of course, I mean, nowadays, every small team inside a big organization also tries to work in an agile fashion. Right, but still, from the overall perspective, I think you will realize that working in a pure startup, right, like for example, Magic Bricks or say DirectI Internet Solutions, I think there's a big difference with respect to the deadlines we have to respect. So yeah, I think my journey in this 11 years has been of both established and startups, and I'm here to answer all your questions.
Oh, fantastic. That's nice. So as you said, it's very different working for established companies versus startups, which is, as you said, you have to fail fast, you have to change quickly. So that's a good experience these days. So earlier, if you see the old world, failure was considered not very fashionable. But now going ahead, it is okay to fail fast, fail forward, and fail cheap. So I think that is what it is. And what do you think are some of the key tenets for why do you see Magic Bricks like a startup? How long has the journey been? I think they kind of started up at the same time as Housing.com, or probably a little later, I think. So what qualifies your definition of why that's a startup, and how is it different from working at SAP or Amazon and things like that?
No, so I think, see, Magic Bricks, when it started its journey, I think it's pretty old, right? Obviously, in the recent few years, like for example, last 6 to 7 years, the real estate industry has come up to a boon, and that's why these aggregators have come into the picture. But from inception perspective, I think Magic Bricks is a very old company. It's like at least 10 to 15 years old company. We started around 2006, right? And I think from that, the journey has been really very exciting. Right. So I think the point I'm trying to make here is that although this company is pretty old, but still, I think the actual competition, right? You named about Housing.com, and there are a lot of other aggregators also. So I think this particular company came into the actual limelight, or the realization part, because of other competitors. Like the real estate industry really came to a boom, like in the last few years itself, like 4 to 6 years, right? And then we started having competitors like all these No Broker, 99 Acres and Housing.com, and believe me, each of these competitors have something unique of their own. So for example, if we talk about Housing.com, they have like one of the best user interfaces, right? If you talk about Magic Bricks, they are like one of the best in terms of the response time or the throughput. So I think every competitor is trying to leverage its own unique selling point, right? So as to just mark its place in the entire it's so much competitive market, right? Nobroker.com. I mean, No Broker, the founder is one of my seniors from IIT Bombay. So I mean, I had a word with Akhil, right? He is also very, very particular about the concept that they don't want to have agents or the brokers, while at the same time Magic Bricks has a lot of traction coming in from agents or the brokers, right? We have a lot of categories. For example, we have something called Commercial Guru in the agent's perspective, which are dedicated for the commercial properties. Who are the verified. I mean, Magic Bricks counts on those agents whom we call as the Commercial Guru agents, right? So I think from that perspective, I think any startup would differ from an established organization, because here we care about the revenue. Here we care about each and every hit which is coming to our website, right? We don't care much about the long-term, revenue making model.
Sorry, Prakhar, just to interrupt you. I think there is some disturbance in the line. I'm getting a harsh thing. So it may not be at your end. It could be the internet which is choppy or something. I'm just finding some harshness.
Okay.
So I'm finding it very. Are you able to hear that, or it's only at my end?
I am able to hear like perfectly.
Okay, yeah, now it is clear to me as well, but in between there is this scratching sound. Yeah, now the sound is gone. Okay, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, I was just telling you the difference, like why actually at startups like like Magic Bricks, we really care about each and every hit which is coming on to the to the website or the web server. That each and every hit we want to turn it to a prospective customer for that real estate entity which the customer is aiming at, right? So I think from long-term goal perspective, a particular startup first aims at establishing itself in the market, and then we should worry about the long-term revenue models. Okay.
Okay. So what do you think are the kind of processes that you are following at Magic Bricks to ensure that you're always selling something what the customer wants? So is it been a combination of lean startup, design thinking, or agile practices? How do you ensure, because startup effort gives you that kind of flexibility as opposed to working for large corporations? So how are you aligning yourself with as you said, the hits that appear on your website, to ensure that this feature is going to be a killer feature, that they will be able to, you bring the buyers and the sellers and aggregate them on a common platform like yours, and they are able to see what is the best value for their money? And how are you ensuring that, you put up a property up for sale, so these guys are able to see each other, the buyer and the seller? And how do you track that customer journey mapping, and how's that been kind of stuff?
Yeah, sure. I think that's a very good question, right? With respect to the customer orientation, right? I think, and that's one of the very important points I would say while we work in a startup environment, right? Because the key important point, as you mentioned, is customer orientation, or what we call, in most of the companies as customer obsession. Right. So the term which we typically use is customer obsession, because the primary perspective how we develop products is, first we have to get into the shoes of the customer, right? So it has to be always on the working backwards, that first we have to think from the customer, and then we have to design our products, right? So one of the key agile methodology which we adopt is, in any meeting room we keep one chair as empty.
Okay.
Right. And the whole reason of keeping that chair empty is that you have to assume that your customer is sitting in that chair, right? So I think that's the seriousness which we keep in our everyday meeting, keeping in mind the customer orientation. And as you said, right, that the entire target, right, right from the UX till the the number of servers to be hosted, or the number of microservices to be designing, right from the entire software architecture with respect to the number of developers being assigned to a particular product, right? Because it's a big journey, right? When we decide with the product requirements and then we finally go on to implement it, it's a big journey, right? It's a very difficult journey, right? So deciding on an idea is pretty easy as compared to implementing it and then making it true, right? That yes, this we have achieved and it is working as per the customer's expectations. So I think that journey, before starting that journey, in fact, you have to make sure that we are aligning with the customer requirements and we don't build a product which is like no use to any customer, right? So I think that is one thing which we really aim at, especially as I'm focusing again and again that at startups, this is one of the very important, very significant points which we want to target, that each and every man hour of our developer team should not go waste. It should actually somehow align to the customer requirements.
So, yeah, I think as you said, the Amazon, Jeff Bezos had that principle of keeping that empty chair. So probably because of your Amazon background, you kind of carried forward that best practice. So that is a good thing to have. But what do you feel, when people actually, you get the requirements from the business analyst team or the marketing team or the market survey team, business intelligence team? So how are they able to, what kind of tools are they kind of using? So do you use a bit of lean startup or design thinking or some business model canvas or those kind of things? So how do they, or do you have a template for customer journey mapping, which helps you to, do all of these things? So what do you think?
Yeah, I think, lean startup thinking, I think is one of the very famous or very popular, methodologies nowadays in every product management the development team interaction part, right?
Because Prahar, sorry to interrupt you. I think I'm getting a lot of disturbance. What I'll do is I'll just, end this meeting. I'll send you another invite. So this part anyway will be recorded. I'll tag it along so that we don't, at the end of one full hour, we don't see that, everything has gone bad. So let me cut it now. And I'll send you a fresh invite.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll send you a fresh invite on your LinkedIn right away.
Sure. Yeah.
Thanks. Please saying when we left off was about how do you manage the customer journey mapping? So yes, please continue.
Yeah, so I think the point I was trying to make is that, especially at small organizations, especially the startups, right? I think the most important aspect when we start building the product is the customer obsession, and I think I'm stressing on the point of why startups only and not like bigger. So of course, at Amazon or SAP Labs, also customer is important, right? But I think there's a whole lot of difference, because at startup we also have to prove that we exist. We are in the process of establishing ourselves in the market. So I think for a particular startup, why customer is even 10x important is because we want to tell the customer that we are there in the market and we are there for you. And just because of you, we will grow 10x or, so I think from the product management perspective, we are talking about the lean startup methodologies, which I think it's very popular right now in most of the companies. I think we also follow a particular of that. And so it's not just a particular, I think, so most of the companies say follow, Agile, Scrum, or say, Kanban, or say, Snowfall. A lot of I think agile methodologies are there, I think, but the crux is always there that we have to be very stringent with respect to the customer requirements. So I think yeah, if we focus on that, and if there is a good sync between the product management and the development team, I think it is going to be very successful. So I think that the key point involves in establishing a perfect synchronization between the different verticals of a particular organization, say UX, then product management, then the quality check, DevOps, engineering. There are different verticals, right? And I think if everyone is linked to each other, everyone supports each other, I think definitely it's going to be leading success.
Okay. So how do you do your storyboarding and that kind of stuff? So is it the product strategy team gives it to you, and then you have multiple iterations, you back and forth, you put it on the website, see the customer reactions, and what works, what doesn't work, that kind of stuff. So basically, do you use some kind of a customer journey mapping kind of a thing, like you have some test beta customers that you try it out with? How do you ensure that, because in a startup that's very, very important, because you're still perfecting the game and you don't know what really works. So how do you make that happen?
Yeah, I think that's a very great question, because I think this is the fundamental of how we go about on the journey of getting the requirements and then finally implementing it, and seeing like it's completely based on the customer feedback, as you mentioned, right? So I think the crux lies here is that first, obviously, majority of the organizations have a product management team which is in direct touch with the customers base, and obviously nowadays there's an ongoing trend that the development team also has to be in the shoes of product management. But I think the majority still goes with the complete relying on the PM team, and then they decide on the requirements, right? That what is the exact functional and non-functional, both kinds of requirements have to be decided. Having said that, it is also important that as you mentioned, that once how do we go about it, right? How do we do the A/B testing? For example, we have certain features implemented, and so before actually finishing off the product, we have to prioritize that in the first release, what are the top 5 features which are mandatorily have to get released in this cycle, and then what are the, say, bottom 5 which we can skip for the first release. Right. The point is that the time to market, which is like the key important criteria, is very, very significant with respect to product launch. And now, as you said, that once we have the first version of a particular, version 1 of a product, and how do we ensure, right, that this is actually satisfying the customer requirements, or this is actually solving a particular consumer problem. So I think the key lies in that we release it to a prod server. We had some sample data initially for the pre-prod server. We test it using that pre-prod sample data, and once we make sure that there is a certain 95 percentile response time, there is a certain threshold with respect to the throughput which we are able to handle, then only we release it to the next and the final staging server, which is called the prod. And even when we handle the prod server, there is definitely a split between the ongoing customer request and the new product release, because we cannot have the 100% of the new incoming request for the new module. We have to see what kind of impact the new module has with respect to key performance metrics, like 95 percentile response time, throughput, what is the average the time during which the customer is is staying on our product, what is the click stream behavior of a particular consumer. So I think these are the key metrics which we analyze once we release it to the market, and based on the and we keep it for a particular time, say for example 2 to 3 weeks, and then we observe the behavior. And of course nowadays we have a centralized logging mechanism. There are very niche Splunk like centralized logging mechanisms, because of which we can analyze, right, that where we can improve our technical product.
Okay, that's nice. Actually, a combination of A/B testing, canary releases, yes, and log monitoring will help you understand customer behavior quite well. So that's good. And how much of a scope does that leave for teams to actually innovate? Because people say I'm very technical, I cannot innovate. So your portfolio is to promote innovation within the team. So how do you ensure that actually happens? Because people say, like, I already have the team requirements, somebody gives it to me, the story is there, I just need to go and code. So if they say, okay, I don't have scope for innovation, so how do you ensure that you motivate people?
Perfect. I think this is actually the actual reason why we have a huge difference between the work environment of a established like R&D firms, right? What we call a typical very fast growing startup, right? For example, you see all these Ola or these Big Basket or all these the companies which are trying to establish themselves. So I think, see, what you said is right, that we have to invest something on R&D or like the innovation. Right, but believe me, innovation comes when you actually have the customer in your pocket, right? There is no point of actually keep on innovating until the customer knows or is aware of using your product, right? So if you come on to Ola, for example, right? So I mean, so Ola is also founded by one of my batchmates. So I think when I had a word with him, he also mentioned the same point, right? That Prakhar, I think the time to have innovation. So innovation is crux, right? I mean, we have to innovate. Innovation is the only thing which is continuous. But believe me, innovation is useful only when you have the customer on board, right? So once we have the Ola app being present on most of the consumers, mobile apps, are like one of the like mandatory kind of apps. It is, especially in India, right? And now if he tries to innovate, the customer values that, right? So I think the key point is that innovation is important, but obviously you just can't say to the product management or to your boss that, sir, I'm not interested in just implementing stuff. I am like an innovator, and give me only the work which is like innovation driven. So obviously you will be given innovation driven work, but provided first you try to establish yourself, right? Then
Absolutely,
only.
I think bang on. So innovation does not work in a vacuum. You need a field ground to actually exercise your innovation, which means you need to have your initial set of paying customers. Otherwise, you'll have a very low morale. If you keep on innovating stuff, but there's nobody to buy, then obviously you'll fall. The product will fall flat. So I think that's a very good point. So the balance of when really innovation comes in is when you have a set of customers and paying with it, and then doing that. So yeah, that's quite well said. So what challenges, what kind of how do you ensure that people have their creative freedom to innovate now that you have customers? Let us say once you have the customers, and how do you ensure that people can let their hair loose and start innovating? And so when do you make that transition that okay, now we can do something about this? So when do you think people should be doing that?
Yeah, so I think I'll just tell you, one of the examples of Amazon, or I worked at Directa Internet Solutions also. So I'll quote one of the examples from Directa in which we were working on contextual advertising. So we were the sole, providers for Yahoo Shopping. I mean, if you talk about 2010, Yahoo Shopping was one of the, very popular. I mean, that time Flipkart, Amazon, all these were
Nobody
like,
was there. Yeah.
yeah. So I think, and you imagine, right? We were handling like the live traffic, like actual live traffic of Yahoo Shopping, right? And you can imagine, like, it's an established firm, it's an established product, and there is a lot of scope for innovation,
Correct.
right? So and the product which we were handling was the contextual advertising, as in, like, if you talk about a particular T-shirt, and you will also see like people who buy this T-shirt are also interested in this. So
Correct.
you will have some 10 options or something, right?
Correct.
This was the product I was in charge of for Yahoo Shopping. And from innovation perspective, so you would say, okay, obviously, I mean, you can innovate like 100 times on that particular page. You can say not just 10, just get the top 5 and improve the quality of those 5, right? Or Prakhar, innovate the entire UI. I mean, let's make the UI much better and much more intuitive from the customer requirements perspective, right? Or else from the database perspective, from the technical architecture perspective, let's have the tech stack improved completely. So let's innovate on the tech stack perspective. So I think there are a lot of scope of innovation once we have the product established. And believe me, I used to spend a lot of time on how to actually innovate with respect to, improving the response time. So, for example, if you if you go to Yahoo Shopping, right, and if you want to buy a checked formal shirt, and if you don't get that particular checked design which you actually have in your mind, and the moment you scroll down in the top 5 suggestions, if you see that, you will be you'll be a bang on customer, and you'll be able to convert that customer into a final purchased order, right? So I think that is where we innovate, right? That once we have the customer on board, and then we want to improvise that experience. So how do we do that? So obviously at that time we will have some scope of R&D, we'll have some scope of brand new innovation that, sometimes people come with me in Magic Bricks, or, other companies also, for example, Amazon. People used to come to me, Prakhar, let's completely revamp the tech stack. I mean, let's completely, do it, overwrite it, right? So I think these are the suggestions people come to me, these are very hard decisions, right? And believe me, if we have time, if we have efforts, if we have bandwidth for that level of innovation, we can achieve really great heights. But as I said, first have some background, first have some base of your product, and then try to innovate. It will lead to 10x growth.
Yeah, I think because startups are always in this challenge of, trying to build your parachute where you've already jumped from the plane and
Exactly.
that kind of stuff.
Exactly.
So what Reid Hoffman says that, if you're not released the first version of your product, if the first version, if you're not embarrassed by the first version of your product, then you're already too late in the market. So that
Exactly.
leaves with very little scope for innovation. Like if you see go by the book, but at the same time, your product and solution have to be innovative because it should have a differentiator from the market. Otherwise, people will
Exactly.
not even look at it.
Exactly.
But yes, the second level of innovation, as you said, definitely will come in when you have the breathing space and you have customers to play around with.
Right.
Otherwise,
Right.
it's meaningless pretty much.
Right.
So that is quite a good thing to have. So, like, how do you have the whole team like structured? It's more agile, or it is, like you have minimum viable products, or you have officially Scrum, or you have your own version of an agile thing with the pair programming, extreme methodology, and all that. So, how does that work? So, have you adopted agile or any other frameworks per se, or something that is proprietary that you use yourself?
Yeah, so I think that I would answer based on my experience in last 2 to 3 organizations, right? So I worked at Amazon, SAP Labs, Times of India Group, and NXP Semiconductors. So I think one thing in common which I've seen at these three bigger organizations like Amazon and SAP Labs especially is that even they are very established organizations, still they are very very agile, right, with respect to the development efforts. So we have typical like 15-day sprint in which we are very particular about what tasks are going to be done by what set of developers, right? And then once we assign those set of tasks to a particular developer, we really expect that even if that developer is not able to complete the work, it's our duty to make sure that the whatever the challenges or the roadblocks that developer faces, it's our duty as a manager that to make sure that he or she is in a very comfortable environment, and then they should feel that they are in a family so that they can complete their work on time, right? So I think the motive is not to make sure that the developers feel stressed, or they feel like they are just there to do their work. And I think the main point which you try to invest is they should get the ownership value, right? So once we are developer level, right, even forget about the leads, forget about the managers, right from the developer level, if you get that ownership sense of value to each of your employees, believe me, the product is going to be definitely successful, right? Most of the organizations which I've seen is that developers have developers, or say QC or DevOps, most of the ground level people, I think, who actually build the product have a sense of feeling that okay, my manager has given me 2 tasks, let me finish those tasks and I'll get some promotion, or I'll get some appraisal. I think that mindset needs to get changed, right? Once you have the ownership that whether I get appraisal or not, whether I get promoted or not, this is the module which my manager has given me, or which the company feels that I should build it, and that is the reason I should build it, right? So I think the moment we have that ownership value, believe me, whether it's a big organization or small, we will be definitely highly successful in that matter.
Okay, okay. So, any formal ways of getting the workforce to, like, the two pizza team from Amazon? Amazon uses like not more than 7 to 9 members per
Yeah.
MVP or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
So, it does the same thing carry forward in your current situation, or it's a larger team of teams, or I mean, how does that work?
No, I think what I have seen at Amazon and after Amazon also is that it's a beautiful concept, right? Two pizza team is it's a beautiful concept because I mean, I think at Google also I have heard that there's a particular threshold on the team size, right? I think 6 or 7 people. After that, it is not advisable unless like you get an approval or something, right? Because what I have seen is that, see, it's good to have diversification in your team, that somebody is good at backend, somebody good at front end or databases, or say somebody good at framework or CI/CD pipelines. So it's good to have a diversified skill set, but believe me, if you overdo it, it will lead to disaster, right? So I'll give you one very brief example is that I had 2 senior architects in my team, and I wanted to get that product launched in like less than 2 weeks, right? The point is that the timeline was much more important to me as compared to, really getting the super best architecture. I mean, obviously architecture is important in a product, but it's important to a certain extent, right? You can't compromise your deadlines because of that. But what happened is I made that mistake. I got I thought like, okay, let me get my top 2 architects in this team, in this product, and I'll get it done. But actually reverse happened. What happened, like most of the time were like they were discussing, oh no, this architecture is going to be like most efficient one. And then the opposite, because see, both were top-notch people, right? Both were like super learned people. And sometimes that leads to disadvantage. I think the key point is you have to play very, very smart. You just can't have like, best set of people and you will like, just sleep over, oh, now my product is going to be like the best one. No. I think you have to be very careful that bigger team size or say team of, over smart people is also not a very good idea. You have to be a very balanced view. Some people should be at a very top level architecture. Some people should be on the implementation level. If you have too much of UX people or UI front end people, it is also bad. You should have a very, very balanced view of what kind of skill set you want. And that should be like a basic minimum, as you mentioned. Like, so 2 pizza is just an abstract idea, but the actual concept is basically you should not overdo what you expect from the team. So you should be in control over what skill set you want and what is the timeline you want to have them delivered.
Correct. But outside of companies like Amazon or Netflix or Google, these are the unicorns, or Microsoft, how difficult or easy is it to frame that 5 to 7, 9 member team, which is all self-sufficient? Because they say getting a full stack engineer, because that's the term that they use. So getting a full stack engineer is like finding a purple frog or something like that. So it's not that easy. So what do you think have been the challenges in achieving that, or how do you eventually, maybe probably when you start off, you may not get a team of that size, but how do you kind of, go towards that?
Yeah, so I think that's a very good point you mentioned for the new trend which is coming up in the industry that, in fact, when I was getting hired at MagicBricks, that is also one of the points which my manager, so I used to report to the CTO. So CTO also told me that, Prakhar, this is the new trend which is actually everyone wants to get it, right? That there will be no separate DevOps, there will be no separate front end, there will be no separate back end, right? Each and every person is expected to deliver stuff, whether it's back end, whether it's front end, anything. Right. So I think that level of independence I learned from Amazon, that Amazon doesn't hire QC or quality check people or, DevOps team or something like that. They expect you to do everything, right? From writing tests, writing integration tests. But yes, as you mentioned about the purple frog, right? That obviously when you increase these expectations up to this level, obviously it's very difficult to find such people, right? So I think the key mantra lies in actually getting the people on board and then training them for a month or 2, right? So what happens is that, see, I mean, if you just go to the market and say, okay, I want a full stack one, you will do everything. Like you have to do backend, front end, databases, everything. So obviously people will get afraid, right? People will not even join you even if you pay them heavily. So I think the key point here lies in that you have to get on board as many smart people as possible. But still, you have to take that fact with a pinch of salt that that they will not be like coming up with all the skill set which you want in one person, right? There is always a scope of improvement or training for every person which you get onboarded. So I think it is, and believe me, you can't expect every person to come up to you and tell sir ki, I'm not good at Java, I'm good at front end, so just give me front end work. This kind of chemistry doesn't work. It is you are the manager, right? You have hired that person, so it is your actually smartness or duty to make sure that you leverage the skill set out of that person, and whichever skills. For example, if he's a database guy, right, and if you want him like to contribute to backend also, it is your duty to make a plan, to chalk out a plan, right? For example, 1 or 2 months. For example, at MagicBricks we started using React also, but many people didn't know React. Right, so obviously we can't expect from day one that they will start contributing React.
Correct.
We have to train them. So only I think when you onboard a person within like a span of 6 months or something, that person gets the tag of full stack developer kind of guy, right? So I think we have to be patient to make sure that people are completely independent on their own.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, because Everybody thinks a full stack team can solve everything, but then the dream team is very difficult to achieve in most companies.
Yeah. I mean,
It
we
is,
have to be very practical. Believe me, we have to be very, very patient, practical, and
yeah.
then we have to take our decisions.
And then your DevOps CI/CD processes have to be really good to support that kind of
Yeah,
a work culture. And companies take 6 months, a year, or two sometimes to really perfect that. To get because the build keeps breaking so many times, and
exactly.
then you still have the old problem of, okay,
Right.
you broke the build, he broke the build,
Yeah.
and
In
that kind
fact,
of stuff.
that is the whole reason why nowadays, if you see on all these Target, like companies like Target, Salesforce, Flipkart or Amazon, these companies have a dedicated team called Dev Tools, team. So actually, they hire people to build the dev tools, so that the developers don't actually have to go outside for installing the products or something. Like every big organization have this team.
Yeah, yeah. I've also seen the trend that they talk about DevOps, but the automating of the DevOps pipeline, they get an expert. They get experts to do it for you while the developers are busy developing code. So they don't worry about the infrastructure and they just focus on writing code. Whereas somebody is reducing the build time from 8 hours to 4 hours, 4 hours to 2 hours, and then using a high-speed server, they bring it down to 15 minutes, then put all the sonar reports and bug fix reports and all of that sort of stuff.
Right,
So that
right.
is
And that
good
is
thing
very
to.
important also, right? That is very
Yeah,
important
absolutely,
because
because not everybody knows that skill, and you can't expect to hire a DevOps guy and then produce a DevOps pipeline, CI/CD pipeline in like 6 months time also, unless of course he's got deep knowledge about that skill set. So
right.
it's actually quite good. So that is about that. And any particular mindsets that you want people to have when working in this kind of a fashion. One is of course the agile mode of working, fail fast, fail forward, and the lean startup and all that. Apart from that, how much of a role do you think culture plays in organization changes? And how have you been trying to introduce that aspect into companies? So because various companies have different types of cultures. Since you also influence as a decision maker, what are your thoughts on actually bringing that to the workforce?
Yeah, so I think what you talked about is like as like most of the companies already have that culture, right? Already have that set of infrastructure which is going to make the life of developer very, very easy. All those sonar reports and stuff, right? But I think just having that environment is not going to help you, right? Just having that infrastructure is not going to help you. You have to be very, very careful whether the developer is comfortable with that environment, right? So it's not just you just impose that environment on a developer that this is the integration test suite environment which you have to use, this is the JUnit mock test or Mockito or Power Mockito libraries which you're supposed to use. No, I don't think that's going to work, right? You have to make sure that these are the tools which are advisable, and even if a developer is not comfortable with these set of tools, you should be open enough, right, to modify your CI/CD pipelines or to modify your infrastructure tools, right? Which I'm seeing the trend, but believe me, 4 to 5 years down the back, like this was not the trend. I mean, the managers were typically, very, very stringent with respect to, no, we have done enough R&D, Prakhar. This is the set of tools, or this is the set of architecture dev tools which you're supposed to use. I mean, you accept it or not, but you have to use it. I think, but now I think from last 1 or 2 years that level of stringency or that strictness is going down. Right nowadays, the managers also expect, or they also understand, right, that the developers are coming from a very rich background, and it is for us also to learn something from them, right? So I think that paradigm is changing. If you see nowadays in the work environment, right, that the developers also learning from managers, and it's a vice versa relationship. So unless you have that flexible environment, right, that even the manager, if the person comes over and says, sir, no, sonar reports are not going to be worth it, right? Let's have the sonar lint plugin inside our IntelliJ IDEA, and then let's do it even before we have the sonar reports. So I think, see, that's a good suggestion which, say, some developer gives it to me, but it will, believe me, it will take some time, it will take some efforts to have that suggestion getting implemented.
Yeah,
So I think,
absolutely.
so it depends on you how much you want to be flexible, and only then the developer will start respecting you, and only then these dev tools or the infrastructure tools will be actually useful.
Correct, correct. It's true. And what do you think has been one of the turnaround stories in your own career that you look back at your career of 12 years now? So we did this, and then that led us to some great success. And so, what would be, so if you want to institutionalize it, or you want to codify it like a best practice that others can follow, what do you think are some of those kind of things that you can actually do, saying that this was a project which was down in the doldrums and we did these kind of things and took it to success? So anything that comes to your mind from that perspective?
Yeah, so I think I'll tell you exact one very brief example of how I faced the same scenario which you mentioned, and how came out of it very successfully. Right, so I joined NXP Semiconductors, which was like a part of Philips earlier, and then it got separated out. So I joined NXP Semiconductors as principal engineer in 2018, and what I realized after joining is that the kind of practices, because see, it's a diversified team. It was like geographically distributed. Some part of the team was in Europe, and the remaining part was in India. So what I realized is that the kind of practices which are being followed with respect to delivering. So it's an agile, right? So you have to deliver every week, every 2 weeks you have to deliver every version of the product. So I think what I observed is that the kind of coordination between two geographically distributed teams has to be on a very synced manner. But I think what I observed is that every person is just responsible for their own work, and they are not in tandem, they are not in sync with what others are doing. So because of which, what is happening is they are reinventing the wheel every week. For example, say let's take a very simple scenario which is called single sign-on feature. So we wanted to have single sign-on with respect to Google. So nowadays, every e-commerce website you have, they have this single sign-on. They sign in with Google, sign in with LinkedIn, sign in with Facebook. So all these are single sign-on modules, right, which we wanted to implement on NXP also. Now what happens is, this is a very typical library which is being implemented by a lot of organizations across the globe. But what happened is, a part of it was gone to Europe team, and the remaining part was being developed by India. Now what happens is that every team is thinking that, okay, if they are done with their job, it is going to be successful. But what happens is, at the end, when we actually combine the two modules which are getting developed independently, it actually doesn't lead to the actual success. So what happens is, we have to again do our efforts in integration. So I think this is just one example I'm telling you that and nowadays it's an MNC. Most of the companies have geographically distributed offices, and dev teams are also in different places. So I think the turnaround point which I gave to the team after realizing this fact is that I increased the level of coordination between the two teams. Right. So earlier, a very basic example I'll tell you is that earlier they used to have different scrums. Right. The European team had a different scrum every day, and we have the different scrum. The first turnaround aspect I gave to them is that let's have a combined scrum. Let's have the daily status of what European team is doing and what Indian team is doing, and let's have the suggestions. So even a junior person can give a suggestion for the senior guy, even if he's like at an architect level. So I think what happened is that the gap, or what they were working in silos, they started contributing to each other's success. So at the end of 1 month, we realized that we could achieve a lot more with less efforts. And that's how I think the team got that ownership that single sign-on is not just my piece of work, it is going to be the team's efforts. And when you realize that part, I think you contribute at least 10x times what you were contributing, since like you just thought that like it's my work. No, it's like the team's work.
Yes, absolutely. So how were you planning the distributed teams kind of work? So was it remote Kanbans or daily stand-ups? Like you have half the team in India, half the team outside of it, and then you have a visual board which says that, okay, how much of to-do is there, work in progress and completed, done. So how are you managing those aspects? Because was it distributed teams within them, or how exactly did you drive that?
Yes, I think Kanban, which you said, is one of the tools or one of the methodologies which people use, right? But I think what we heavily rely on was on like Agile Scrum the daily Scrum and the Jira tools. So Jira is a very, very, convenient tool for the developers right now in the market with respect to the geographically distributed teams. So there actually you can, click on a particular developer name and that will list out the list of tasks which are actually in sync with other team members also. Because the Jira is continuously evolving, right? So even now, if you go to a particular Scrum or a sprint, right, or 15 days sprint, you will see the set of tasks and the set of people and their interaction also, right? So gone are the days in which Jira was just a project tracking tool. Nowadays, in fact, I'll tell you, one of the tools which we used to have is like before even doing the sprint planning, right, we used to estimate how many days or how many story points we used to allocate for a particular task. And believe me, that was like an auctioning system. Like, for example, every team member used to vote that this particular task is going to take 2 story points or 2 days, or say 4 story points, 4 days, right? So I think that level of respect everyone used to have based on that voting mechanism, that if this task is going to take 10 days and if the team thinks that this should be done in 20 days, then let's give it 20 days. There's no harm in it. Right, so that level of distributed culture started happening when we start using Jira, and there are other tools also which enable you to vote for deciding the story points, and that gives the entire team a very clear picture of how much time a particular task is going to take, rather than just a manager deciding no, let's do it in 4 days, and there is absolutely no base in that.
Correct, absolutely. So that is a good point. And then how do you ensure that people were following interoperability standards, or probably I think when you have distributed teams, as you said, the case of single sign-on, there's 2 guys on the other side, one guy is developing the same set of libraries, this guy is also developing the same set and duplicating work. So to avoid that, how did you go about the interface design? So was there chief architect who will actually put the or somebody above, lead or somebody who would actually sketch out the interface API stuff and say, okay, this part will be done in India, the rest will be done in Europe, or things like that. So I think over and above this thing, I think that's also required, right? So to drive that, and after that comes the Jira efforts and stuff like that. So I'm assuming that was also in place.
Yeah, definitely. See, I mean, when you talk about a multi-billion-dollar impact project, right? Obviously, you have to have a very stringent line of developers, then leads, and then architects, right? So any decision with respect to the technical architecture or with respect to the timeline deliveries, I think we have to involve the technical architects. Why? Because it is not just going to be like, you have to implement a particular task, but still you have to make sure that the existing architecture is in compliance with the new features which you want to add them, right? So whenever we used to have a new task getting implemented, was mandatory that we have to consult with the principal architect or the main architect of that product. And whenever we have distributed, teams, like geographically distributed teams, we typically have one architect per location. For example, if you are a developer and you are not able to contribute to a particular module because of its complexity, right? Maybe it is like multi-inheritance module, which like you don't want to just insert a particular class, Java class. So I think there the contribution of an architect is very, very important.
Yeah, fantastic. I think that solves the problem of distributed teams, because you finally have team of teams or scrum of scrums, as they call it. So there needs to be a central layer which is actually coordinating all of these kind of stuff.
Exactly.
So yeah, I think that's a good point. So I think what you're hinting at is the culture. When teams are distributed, the communication lines have to be very transparent and very open. Otherwise, you can land into problems.
Right.
So that should be good enough. And then how much of architecture is planned versus how much of it is emergent? Like you said, you had 2 great architects in the team and they actually ended up creating stuff. So then everybody has their own school of thought, whereas you have a customer delivery and deadline also to meet. So how much of that needs to be balanced with practical reality? Because if you don't plan for a future also, you might create a product which is not futuristic. So that can also happen, because if you don't listen too much, you're behind the schedule. If you don't do the right thing, then you don't scale as well. So what has been the right mix to take that forward? So I think all of us would come with some amount of maturity that right in the beginning, we do a decent job of it. But as you said, that's a huge challenge, agile
Right.
versus architecture problem in most companies. So, you'll get into those kind of issues. So I think you brought out that point that, that's a very tricky point in most companies, that if you listen too much, you're behind the schedule. If you don't do it, then you've lost the long-term game,
Right.
and that kind of stuff. So that's a good thing. And how do you think how can people cope with technology obsolescence, and how should they be planning their careers forward? What's your experience been typically from how they should be planning technology obsolescence, because they say the shelf life of any good product is 6 months to a year, and then they already want to change the stack again. So how do you think they should be actually planning for that?
Yeah, so I think it's a very tough question, right? And believe me, there's no right or wrong answer that, how do we plan for the future based on the current requirements, right? Because as I said, right, that whenever you are building and whatever you are building, you are doing the best at that particular current time, right? And then how do we talk about the future, or, how do we plan for the future is very difficult to say at any current point of time, unless you have the roadmap very, very clear. I think what I would suggest is that you need to have both short-term goals and long-term goals with respect to customer requirements and the technical, functional and non-functional requirements. And then only when you're done with your short-term goals, right, which you want to serve immediately for the customer requirements, I think only then you should start worrying about what are the turnaround time, or what are the key improvements you want to get into your product for the long-term goals. So I think the key point I would again reiterate is that you first have to have to actually focus on what is in your immediate plate, right? What is in your plate for the immediate goal for the next 1 or 2 months, and only when you're done with that, you should actually focus for the long-term picture. That okay, let's have this basic product done, and then I have 1 or 2 months ahead of me, so let me target that part also, so that after 1 month I don't have to reinvent the whole architecture. I'm already on the verge of it. So I think some part of planning is definitely required, so that after 1 year you don't have to again and again repeat the same efforts. But still, I would again reiterate that you have to focus on the current work very, very sincerely. Only then you will be able to save your future. So only when your current, so for example, the same single sign-on feature, right? You can't make that single sign-on feature very, very perfect, believe me. So you have to first make sure that it works. It works minimum viably, for the customer.
Absolutely, yeah.
And only when you get the feedback, you will think about, okay, how to make it more optimized with respect to the future requirements, or make it more scalable, or make it more flexible.
Yeah, I think do small things with great love, and great things will follow. So that is a good case in point, because the guys who join freshly there after the shiny new thing, okay, they hear today it's React.js, tomorrow it's Node.js, and tomorrow it's CoffeeScript and something else. Correct. Which is quite popular in the market, and they run behind that without understanding the whole value chain. So that's a good thing. So how should people actually plan for their skill set upgrade or whatever? How have you been keeping in touch with technology adoption? Because as you said, change is very hard on people, because there's so many things that are changing, and then you need to keep in sync all of those parameters, and then you need to deliver as well. So what has been your experience in terms of how to keep oneself updated? Is it subscribing to courses, or going to tech meetups or tech talks, or listen from your peers, or get your hands dirty and learn? What are your approaches?
Yeah, so I think I'll jot down here the kind of methodology which we used to adopt at SAP Labs. So I think SAP is very much innovation-driven organization, where we make sure that we are not just doing what we are doing, we actually keep ourselves up to date with the market technologies. So I think the key aspect of that is making sure that every Wednesday, so I'll just tell you what we used to do at SAP Labs, is that every Wednesday we used to have one tech event, right? And from our team itself, it was an internal event. And so, for example, if you have a team of around 15 to 20, developers, come tech people, every person is going to be delivering one tech topic for at least 1 to 2 hours, and that tech topic has to be very much obviously relevant of the work which you want to do. So it may not be related to the tech stack which you are currently operating in, but it has to be somewhat relevant to the work which you actually are delivering. So that I mean, we used to have it because, see, ultimately you have to get the interest of the people to attend that tech talk, and it has to be very interactive, right? So of course, I mean, attending Udemy and the Coursera, a lot of online portals are there where you can attend it, and we used to have a sponsoring mechanism that we used to have some budget. So the customer, the employee can get the subscription for these courses and get it reimbursed from the employee budget. But I think this is going to help only to a certain extent unless you have this interactive culture within the team, right? That if I know, suppose microservice architecture, and say this is getting used, so for example, microservice on the top of Kubernetes containerization part, right? Now that is very significant with respect to scalability. But once you realize that most of the team members are not aware of it and you have a pretty much good hold on that, obviously you would take initiative and approach yourself, the manager, that sir, I want to take this topic upfront and let me give me a chance, right? So I think these kind of steps I have seen, these kind of initiatives I have seen, and believe me, this works a lot. I mean, this is really a very, very great initiative nowadays. Companies take it. So yeah.
Yeah, I think Tech Talks is really good because, as I said, you can learn from peers and their experiences. So something, you teach something, and then that is the fastest way to learn on the job, and you don't need to. I remember attending similar sort of stuff in a couple of my companies as well. They used to be called the Tech Talks. So you are given some points to do the talks, which will count in your appraisals also. And so it was a very nice way. There would be some great listeners who I remember made some absolutely dry topics very, very interesting. So that was their forte. If somebody else presents it, they would drive them to like sleep or something. But there were some fantastic guys that, and then now I see they're all their skills there have really helped them to go where they've reached.
Definitely.
So it is actually quite good. So that is about that. And how much of domain skills plays a role in your current role? So do you need to know about the real estate? Obviously, you need to know real estate domain, the construction business, and the buy-sell kind of economics. So how much of domain actually plays a role in your current scheme of things?
I think it is very, very important, right? Once you realize the significance of your current domain, only then actually you contribute, you can know the seriousness of that product, right? I mean, if you don't know what the sellers want to do on your MagicBricks portal, right? Or if you don't know, why a customer actually is arriving on MagicBricks portal and what are the targets he or she has in her mind, there's no point in writing that, Java code, right? So I think, believe me, so I'll give you a very, very smart example, right? That I just once got a call from the recruiter, one of the recruiters, when I was making a switch earlier. So it was from Licious and all. I mean, Licious is this.
Meat delivery app.
Yeah, e-commerce for meat, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like a hardcore pure vegetarian person, right? And they wanted this head of technology. They wanted this head of.
So it went against your ethics to join that company.
And not just ethics, not just ethics. So believe me, I'll just tell you very brief my interaction part with the recruiter. Right, so he said that Prakhar, we are looking for someone head of technology, and it is going to be like head of engineering for Licious portal. So I was like, okay, yeah, I'm ready. I mean, let's start the interview process. So he was like, no, sir, there's a caveat. The caveat is like, it's a domain-driven role also, that you have to be very, very comfortable, because sometimes you will have to visit the warehouse. And I was like, hey, dude, you're hiring me for engineering role, and you expect me to visit the warehouse? Are you sure what you're saying? So he was like, yeah, definitely, sir. Because see, we have mandatory saying that every 2 weeks you have to visit the warehouse. Otherwise, you will not understand the seriousness, right? So, I mean, that level of transparency even that recruiter had with respect to the head of engineering role, that, even if you're hardcore engineering, right, still it doesn't matter. You have to visit the warehouse.
Absolutely, yeah.
Otherwise, you are not going to get the actual feeling, that what they are going through.
Yeah, I think that's a classic point. And then you couldn't take up that job, obviously.
Obviously, I didn't even appear for the interview process. Forget about the organization, right? So, but
Yeah.
I mean, you can't, just overlook the domain.
Yeah,
Domain
you
is
have to be on the field to
of
really
course,
know and put
of
yourself in
course,
the shoes of the customer and
of
that
course,
kind of stuff. So
of course.
Airbnb, the initial founders, they went and stayed in their own
Yeah, yeah,
Airbnb
of
initially.
course,
The
of course.
Redbus guys, that
Yeah,
Funny and
actually travel.
team,
Yeah,
they
yeah.
went and sold the tickets on the road
Yeah, I
and
met Funny.
things.
In fact, 2-3 months before I met Funny in a seminar, and I had I personally met him and I had a word with him that what do you feel is the main crux behind why Redbox is like nowadays the main monopoly. All these ticket please and lot of other players are there, but still Redbus is the main one. So he said the exact thing that Prakhar, before launching this Redbus, I wanted to get comfortable with what are the actual problems being solved by both, like the drivers, like the bus operators and the consumers. Right. So only when I understood the pain points of both the sides, then I decided to launch this product. So, he was very, very clear with the vision we had that, unless you understand the pain points of the actual problem, and you build like super top notch architecture, top notch architecture product, there's no point.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think unless you understand what the dynamics of it are and really understand, put yourself in the shoes of the customer and do it, it
Exactly.
doesn't make sense.
Exactly.
Because I also got to know that Redworks has a good infrastructure. They use Google Bigtable, Kafka in the back end, and all of
Exactly.
that sort of stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's mixing the best of both worlds, best of the domain,
Right,
best of the
right.
technology, and so I think it's as equal as is important to understand technology, equally important or more important to understand the domain,
Right. Right.
that kind of stuff. So that is about that, and I think that kind of answered the question of software is eating the world. Every company will be an IT company. So I think this discussion of ours kind of helped answer that part. Though everything is going to be IT, fundamentally you have to solve a business problem, and only then you can actually, and you have to solve it in a way in which the customer likes it, and then he becomes
Right.
your fanboy, and
Right.
only then you can do that. So
Exactly.
that is one thing. So just give me a minute. I'll just check if there are any high-level thoughts that we need to cover or touched upon based on what I'd shared. Yeah, I think how much of the product mindset is there in been in the companies that you've been working on. So I think that would be the last thing, and then probably we can close this. So how are companies thinking in terms of product mindset? Earlier it was mostly project based, so now it is mostly product based. So how's that working?
So I'll tell you one example from a startup, which is Guavas Network Systems. It is into big data analytics, right? So it is
Which one? Govas.
Guavas. So Guavas is like a guava. So we used to have it like a guava has a very typical shape, right? It comes in different shapes like guavas. So I mean the key point of for having the name behind guavas is like guava comes in different shapes, and every shape has its is its own shape, and like still the main like you can have the same content, but the outside shape can be different. So, I mean, the key vision what we have is that we used to cater to different kinds of customers. Still, the big data analytics which we used to provide was actually mostly relevant to the actual content which you used to have. So, for example, the one of the customers we had is Verizon, AT&T, all these big telecom customers of US, right? Now, the point is that the big I mean the question which you asked, right, that how is it going to I mean, how do I answer it, like so we started with services mindset, right, the project mindset, that okay, we have AT&T, we have Verizon, let's have one project called AT&T, let's have one project called Verizon, and let's serve both these projects, and we were going very, very fine, right, we are earning money, everything was fine. But after serving them 1 year, after 1 year, we got two more customers. And then we realized that are we going to do the same exercise for those two new customers? The answer was a clear no, right? And then the second answer came, which was like, let's have a product, right? Instead of just serving the customers, let's have a product which serves everyone. Then we started taking out the modules which are common and which are the base background for each of these projects. Then we started thinking in terms of the product perspective, that our goal should not be a project. Our goal should be a product which serves the needs of all the customers. Of course, the domain is important. For example, here we used to cater to the telecom sector. Now, if you talk about Walmart or Sears, all these JCPenney, all these real estate sectors, their data, their real-time data analytics is completely different. So there the product might be slightly different online, but still the mindset is still the same, that the project is going to serve you only for a year or two. But if you have a product, it's going to be for the lifetime.
Yeah, I think
you know very well for the Microsoft Windows part, right? So Microsoft has some services teams also, but the crux is always on the Windows, which is a product.
Yeah, I think that's very well said. So did you happen to work in Govas, or was it?
Yeah, I was there. I was there as a part of it. Yeah, and in fact, I was the part of the crux team, which we used to call the Rubix.
Oh,
Rubix was the name of the product which it wanted to launch based on the projects it did in the past.
okay. And that turned out to be a
Of course,
market.
I mean that was like a turning point. I mean, believe me, like we could handle 8 to 10 customers at a time because we had the product ready. All we had to do is we had to just customize it based on the the customer requirements. Otherwise, the basic product was ready. I mean, so yeah, of course.
I think Guava was a very good name for the kind of problem that you are envisaging.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, you end up creating one ODC for every new project that you take over.
Exactly.
And you recruit people, and then you waste time. So that is very, very good. A real example of how you really face that thing.
Yeah.
So it's a good nugget that has come out from this. So I think that's been fantastic, Pragar, talking to you. It is great. Thanks for sharing your time. I think today must have been a very busy day, start of the week for you. And in spite of that, we found time to chat. And so I think stay tuned on this. We'll be in touch as well. And thanks for your time very much.
Sure.
And I think our listeners will definitely get a lot of value, because we discussed transformation in its all journey, agile, lean startup, innovation, culture of the company, and pretty much all of these things. So I think that's a fantastic interview, and a lot of real examples came out from this, which you have really worked on and stuff like that. So I think that should help a lot of guys who are trying to enter and become architects or senior tech leaders in their journeys. Thanks very much, and we'll keep in touch.
Sure. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, brother. Bye.
Yeah.